Today's episode of Proudly Jewish is a little out of the ordinary. It was a live panel discussion held at my Congregation Neveh Shalom in Portland, Oregon, with me and my clergy colleagues, Rabbi David Kosak and Rabbi Eve Posen, and we discussed celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut post October 7th. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our program this evening. This is the first of this kind of talk that we're doing. It's called Clergy in Conversation. And I'm Cantor Eyal Bitton. And to my right, we have
David Kosak.
Rabbi David Kosak. And to my left,
Rabbi Eve Posen.
Rabbi Eve Posen. Now I'm louder than all the both of you, which I didn't want.
Well, I wasn't going right, and now
Okay.
I'm in it.
All right. The topic for this evening that we chose, as we are approaching, just in a short while, in a few days, Yom Ha'atzmaut. And we thought we would look at Yom Ha'atzmaut post October 7th. This is the first Yom Ha'atzmaut celebration of Israel's independence since the great horrific massacre of October 7th. Rabbis, Yom Ha'atzmaut is coming up.
It is.
Is it going to be a joyous one, Rabbi Kosak? Is it going to be a happy simcha?
There's a Hasidic story about this rabbi who was always a jokester, always in a good mood, always laughing. And at a certain point, he stopped telling jokes, he stopped laughing, and eventually people started to ask, what's the matter? And he said, when I was younger, I could keep my head and heart in heaven at the same time that I could tell jokes. Now, which happens to some of us as we age,
Rabbi,
I can only do one thing at a time. Yep.
Rabbi, because I just got the note that they can't see, because of the live stream video, they can't see you as much. Let's move you in a little closer.
Pretend like we like each other a little bit more. I'll move a little closer too.
Yeah, no. We want to hear what you have to say fully, and we want everyone at home to be able to hear and see us all.
So anyway, this particular rabbi said, when I was younger, I could focus on both heaven and humor at the same time. And once I really needed to focus on just one, I chose to keep my thoughts Be'avinu b'shamayim, on sort of God in heaven. So why is that story relevant? I think that, first of all, it points out that each of us is going to approach this a little bit differently based on our own personality, our temperament, whether we can, in a certain sense, have cognizance of this new era in which we're living and still enjoy it. And I think that's important. My grandfather always used to say that, and some of you have heard it, that in life you have to chase the simchas because the suris chases us. Right, and so we're in an age.
For those who don't know,
Soros. Yeah. So in life, you have to chase after the good times because the bad times just happen on their own. So I think it's going to be really interesting, and it's going to be an individual sort of emotive experience based on who we are.
Last question for you before I ask the same question to Rabbi Posen. How about for you?
Yeah, first of all, it's always dangerous to predict how I'll feel on a particular day in the future, right? I have to just be open to what happens or what comes to me at that moment. But I would not be surprised if it's of mixed emotions for me.
Mixed emotions. Rabbi Posen.
I'm going to answer both of your questions in the same place because I've been thinking about Yom Ha'atzmaut and what it's going to feel like, and I read this question of, is it going to be a joyous one, etc., and I could think of only what we do at a wedding, which is a wedding is always filled with the joy, and at the end we stop and we smash a glass to remind us of the brokenness in the world. I think about Pesach, where we have our cups of wine, but we take out a drop for each of the plagues, and I think that that's the model that Judaism and the people of Israel are based on, which is we hold moments of joy and moments of sorrow, and they can envelop one another in that space. I think it's very human to want to find joy and to live in the joy, and yet I know in the grief work I've been doing that grief is there, and sometimes when we're grieving and we feel joyful, we feel guilty for having that joyful moment amidst all the sorrow. But that's all a part of the human experience. And so I think Yom Ha'atzmaut should be perhaps a joyful opportunity to celebrate this moment and those that have worked to create the state of Israel and sustain the state of Israel and Am Yisrael coming together. And at the same time, it'll have that poignancy of taking out that drop of wine or smashing the cup. I mean, it's exactly Yom HaZikaron into Yom Ha'atzmaut. It gives that purpose of blending the days together. And I think for me, it'll feel exactly like that.
I appreciate that, and both of you are saying similar things in different ways, and that's very Jewish that we can hold two truths at the same time. One is not right and one is not wrong. Those are not two truths. These are truths. And I was going to give a similar answer to you in that, the personal story for me is just a few days before my wedding to my first and only wife, Michelle Treasure, was my aunt, my mother's sister, passed away, and she was like a second mom to me. A huge fan of things I did, and we could talk through the late night. And I'd play Scrabble with my mother and my aunt and all that sort of thing. And she was dying for months and months and months and months and months. And she had asked her doctor, "Can I get to my nephew's wedding, even if I'm in on a gurney or something?" She died about 4 or 5 days before my wedding. And it was very painful. It was very, very hard. And I told myself, it didn't take me much to get to that place, but I told myself, there is no way that my aunt would have been the reason to ruin my wedding. She'd want the opposite. Mm-hmm. Celebrate. There's no question about that in my head. And I chose to celebrate. And there's a corner of me that night that I carried. I think that's what we're going to do, many of us, on Yom Ha'atzmaut. And we'll see. We'll see how we react and how, we're clergy. We have our own emotions and experiences, and we do carry our congregation's experiences, our congregants.
I mean,
right?
It makes me go back to when we were on the Bima on the morning of Shmini Atzeret, which was October 7th, and I woke up and you had texted, "What are we going to do?" And Simchat Torah began that night, and we sat in this space of right? We sing that. This is the day that God made. We're supposed to be joyful. We have Hallel. We're supposed to be in that space, and yet we were torn in this horrific, and we didn't even yet know the magnitude of what had happened, and yet somehow we got to the 7th Hakafa, which was the only one that we danced at, but we danced. Because that's what we had, that's what was needed during our sat class in the morning. I think in a way that may have prepared us a little bit as a congregation, or at least I think as clergy, I'm looking back on that exhausted moment of cathartic dancing really in the midst of grieving in order to be able to be present.
Now, I think that we've already answered my next question, the next topic, but just to be clear, let's touch upon it. We want to carry both the grief and the joy and really be joyous, at least us. And we're not telling you what to do. I think this is, we're reflecting. To be joyous, is there an element, if we are in that moment of joy, are we disrespecting the victims of October 7th? Are we disrespecting the hostages who are being held there right now, right when we are celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut? Rabbi Posen, if you want to take that first.
I think we're not disrespecting them. Mm-hmm. I think that I'm going to start with the hostages because that one's an easier answer for me in that space. They're all wanting to come home. And where is home? It's Israel. And so to be celebrating that state exists feels appropriate that they would want to come back as well. With the victims, I don't think it's disrespectful. I think that there's a harder part of what it means to be in communal grief and mourning, and Jewish mourning practices are really clear in the first year about what you can and cannot do and where you can go. And as a people in mourning and a country in mourning, I'm grateful that Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, is right before that so it can be honored. And I wonder if some of the tamped down, because even though I think we should be joyous and this Yom Ha'atzmaut can have joy, I do think it will be more tamped down because out of respect for the victims, we will dance again, and yet we're not ready quite yet to do that.
Let's hear what Rabbi Kosak says. I have something I want to say
Go
to
ahead,
that.
Cantor, go for it.
Well, remember you spoke about what happened on Simchat Torah, and I just said a moment ago that we carry your emotions. I don't know if you understand that. There's a back and forth vibe that's given during services, whether you're bored or not. We feel an excitement.
We know.
We feel an ebb. We feel a flow. We do. And that evening, there was this trepidation in the congregation that we felt too. And it's this back and forth. You know, you give to us, we give to you, etc. And we are like, we are shocked. We don't know what to do. We're in grief. And we had these more gentle melodies and reflections that we started there. By the end, we were Jewish. We are part of Am Yisrael. We are something to celebrate. We are together. Am Yisrael Chai. All that came out. Mm-hmm. So I think it might be that sense of that growth of the trajectory of celebration. Rabbi.
I feel good with what you guys
Okay. Well, I love it when people have the same thoughts as I do. And
you did write all the answers down.
Right. No, but I jest, of course, to some degree. Now, one of the reasons that we had tonight is for so many people, October 7th, and I'm talking about American Jews in particular, the relationship with Israel, right? For some people, it's this. For some people, it's that. And there's a lot of trying to get... We look back at... I think there's a lot of reflection that has gone on in the Jewish community, and even for us Jewish leaders. And we are thinking about the meaning and value of this Jewish state to us and to the Jewish people. So, what is it fundamentally that we are celebrating on Yom Ha'atzmaut? What is this day?
That's an important question. We're celebrating the miracle. And so what is this miracle? Watch out, you might get what you asked for. Right? Yom Ha'atzmaut is the miracle of returning to self-determination, to self-responsibility, to the messy politic of running a nation state. Watch out, you might get what you ask for, right? That is not easy. That is not all cookies and cream. So Yom Ha'atzmaut is actually saying we want to be full adults. We want to have our own destiny in our hands in the land where this Jewish story began, in this country where our hearts and eyes and prayers were always linked. We want to know what it is like to test your values in the messy real world. Mm-hmm. That's what Yom Ha'atzmaut is. And I think part of the difficulty for a lot of people, right, particularly as American Jews, we do not have that same level of responsibility of self-determination, right? Maybe within our communities we have to shape them, within our professional lives, yes, as American citizens, but we don't have that. And that's a very big divide, I think, between the American Jewish experience and the Israeli Jewish experience. We don't celebrate the miracle in the same way, even though our hearts are there, because ultimately we're not responsible for making sure 7 million people, Jewish, Muslim, Druze, foreign workers, are safe. but that's what independence is.
Thank you. Rabbi Posen.
I think I agree a lot with what Rabbi Kosak just shared. I'm not sure cookies and cream. Maybe mint chocolate chip.
Mint chocolate chip.
One of my favorites, particularly as a kid. It's a great flavor.
Now we're talking.
Yeah.
But I agree in that sense. I'm thinking about the times, what do we tell children? What do we say Yom Ha'atzmaut is? It's Israel's birthday, which is not really real. That's not what Yom Ha'atzmaut is. It's not a birthday party, because then the modern state of Israel was established on that date, but it's not Israel's birthday. How many New Years do we have as a Jewish people, right? So I think when we're here in America, it's very easy to think about it as only 1948 and beyond, because we're not living there. The history isn't in our faces every day. But being in Israel, I was in Israel for the 50th. It was my first time in Israel. I was living there for 6 months in high school. I got this, it was so much more. It was the first time that I realized that it's not a birthday party, that it's not it's much more than the 4th of July, because it was this pride in being these people, and the work that went into being this people, and the history of the land is celebrated in that kind of a way. And so I think it's you get what you asked for, yay-ish. In addition to being in Israel, it has so much more than it does as an American Jew, in the way that we sort of have taught it for all these years.
And to me, it is those things. And I want to go back to the tikva of it, the hope of it, that ideal, not idyllic, but the dream of Israel. Liot am chofshi, right? To be a free people in our own land. The hope of 2,000 years. To me, there is no greater miracle or no greater moment in the history of the Jewish people in 2,000 years than 1948, the birth of Israel. The Holocaust was, forget miracle, but it was pivotal, was horrific. And I would still say that 48, the birth of Israel, is the greatest miracle, the greatest and most important event, because there have been other calamities, there was the Spanish Inquisition, there were other persecutions at smaller levels, nothing like the Holocaust, but we've experienced that to this extent, that extent. We never experienced what leads to this responsibility. And I think that the value that, I don't know that enough people give the value to Yom Ha'atzmaut that I think it deserves, which is, wow, we have a Jewish state. I think they did in 48, in the 40s and early 50s, and they danced and all that, and they had this rebirth of Jewish peoplehood, and I think we've lost that.
Everyone's an adult here. I don't know who's at home. Ben Gurion's famous line about wanting a state where the criminals and sex workers are all Jewish. Okay, just let that sit in.
So to go from
he was not saying that as a joke. We laugh maybe because it's a little bit uncomfortable.
But the criminals, the life like any other state, but. So you're getting to the. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's also a moment of hope in that fact. Yes. Laura and I had a little tiny car when we lived in Israel, and it was stolen. The only time we've had a car stolen. Right. And we thought, this is beautiful. Not initially. But why? Because the Jews stole it on this side of the Green Line and then brought it to the Palestinian chop houses on the other side of the Green Line, and they shared the profit from our car. And I thought, there's a possibility, hatikva, of hope.
Right.
The car we got in replacement was even worse. So, what are you going to do?
So, October 7th strikes. And I think that one thing that many people, that what has stirred a lot of people in the Jewish community is this realization. I think it was intellectualized before, but all of a sudden there's a realization that's real, that Israel's existence is still precarious today in 2023 when it hit in 2024. Did you feel yourselves personally? Did you kind of feel that in your kishkas, in your gut? For those of you, not figuratively, your gut, that Israel's existence was precarious. Rabbi Posen, or do you agree?
I don't think I can disagree. Yeah. I think that there are some that would say yes. I sort of, Israel's existence has always been precarious. The day the War of Independence, right? Like the day 1948, the State of Israel. The next day, you're in a war. Like it's. I think that for me, it's more about were we ever able to get comfortable in the confidence in a Jewish state, and I don't have I feel like it's always been precarious, and since October 7th, it's less about the state of Israel or Israel's existence as it is about where Jews are going to be in our world, I think. To sort of answer, that's where the question lies, is that we were always able to, the Jewish diaspora, I think, is more precarious in this moment, perhaps, than with anti-Semitism, than the actual state of Israel.
Yeah. You bring up an amazing point. And, Israel's existence is still precarious, I would argue.
Yeah.
But I think that whereas they can defend themselves and land on their feet one day, and I think they will, what we have seen here, how do you turn that page, right? We live among these people. Your kids who are on campus live with these people who have told them you're not welcome here. That doesn't change day one after the war. But Rabbi Kosak, your reflections.
Yeah. So what, on a feeling level, yes and no, right? Just growing up, particularly at an era when the American Jewish community had such pride in Israel, and I had a little blue and white kibbutz hat, and the song I remember, at my little synagogue my big synagogue growing up, was "We're going to Israel, beautiful Israel. We're going to Israel, where we say shalom," and it goes on.
Wow, I don't know.
It's about
that
the
one.
whole
I
word.
don't know that one.
It's a childhood song that no one else. So I don't know whether it's unique to my childhood congregation or not. So there was always this, the mythos of it from age, the reality of it. I learned to drive a stick shift on a John Deere tractor with 600 eggs on the back of a Kibbutz Ramat HaShofet.
Wow.
Those are tangible. They're real. They're meaty. They just are. The history of Israel, its wars, we all always sense that precariousness of a certain era, and we are all more or less in Israel awareness. We're of the same generation, despite differences of age, right? There's a younger generation which has viewed and believed, and maybe even still thinks of Israel as this incredible powerhouse. And many of us even took pride in that fact, and yet anyone who knows history knows that no country actually is secure, right? Every country has an expiration date, right? Just because we've come back, we had the first Commonwealth, we had the second Commonwealth. Please, there should be no fourth Commonwealth, right? This third should be the last. But history doesn't always work that way. So there's that level of danger in it. There's also, we had our Scholar in Residence program, and they were talking about, Israel's relative advantage is its technical skills and students and the work that it does in that area. But it's pretty hard to pick out any small country in today's world that can feel secure. Switzerland, okay, those mountains still help it. But Israel is not a superpower and cannot be a superpower because of its size. It simply doesn't exist in the world. You need vast land, resources, human resources, buffers of all those sorts. And, the age of, Portugal taking over the world, I think, are far behind us. Who are the global powers today? America, China, Russia, all very large countries.
Yeah. I'm going to jump to the two points down for a moment because it's very connected. My question about existential threats. I think that, I've heard, I think we all have, about how October 7th shocked Israel because there was this, I think there's an intellectual in Israel and among us, an intellectual understanding that Israel faces an existential threat. And at the same time, no way. Israel is the strongest country in the Middle East. It can take on, I feel like a kid in grade 2. My father can beat up your, but
I never thought my dad could beat up anyone else's dad.
The idea that even, big European countries, Israel is no slouch compared to so many countries on the world stage in so many ways. No way. Sure, they're going to try this and try that, but fundamentally, Israel they've gone beyond a certain level, that existential threat, the desire to destroy Israel is always there within Israel's enemies. But the actual real threat, I think many people thought we're beyond those days. I might be wrong, but that's my sense.
I think you're right, and simultaneously it confuses. Look, America has learned this lesson again and again. Israel's learning it now. There's a limit to hard power in today's world, right? There are so many objectives that cannot be solved by strength of arms.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's no solution, which I think is kind of the difficulty in there. And if you can't solve it, then crises like this, it doesn't matter whether or not Israel is stronger than Iran or not. I think that on a technical level depends on the sort of warfare.
Yeah.
There are ways in which Iran would wipe Israel off the map by just sheer number of soldiers. Right. As we saw, we're talking about air, missiles and whatnot. Israel clearly has a strategic edge. So there are a lot of different forms of fragility.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing also.
And I think about this a lot, the difference between the modern state of Israel and the land of Israel. And we're talking about Yom Ha'atzmaut as it relates to the modern state of Israel. I think for there's that piece that, of course, Israel's going to be there because it's got the temple and the Dome of the Rock and all these holy sites that Israel fundamentally has to exist so that these sites will exist. And it's a flip in the mind in the moment, I think, to move beyond the safety of the actual land of Israel as a space that will always exist as Israel to the modern state, which is very precarious in that situation, in this moment, as it exists in this day. And part of that is, I think, because we recognize that this land is so fraught with other people that have claims to it or connections to it, that what it looks like may be changing. And whenever something starts to change is the thing that we all hate the most, really. Change is so hard. Whenever there's any kind of change that happens, that's when everyone tenses up and all of our warfare comes out, because it's fight or flight happens. And as we think about this place where we are now, the different threats come in and the different nature of the state show up. And what that looks like, I think, is where we're at. We're on a precipice.
And for me, I've always, since October 7th, the precariousness of Israel's survival, that existential threat has been crystallized in the sense that, okay, Hamas can't in and of itself destroy Israel. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iraqi factions, Houthis, ISIS. Iran together, maybe they can't either. Maybe they can. But when you also factor in, what if the political picture in the U.S. were different? And some of us, are worried as the position of the government has wavered in different ways since October 7th in terms of, standing right with Israel, not standing with Israel in certain ways. Like, what if on October 7th the government didn't look like the government there, but was led by the next generation, the students that we see on campuses, the students who believe that it is a moral right, a moral imperative for Israel to not exist. These are lawyers, some of them, right?
Which students? The loud students?
Yeah.
The ones whose voice, because I think there are students on campus, as we saw the letter from Columbia University students, if they were there, if that was the voice in leadership, it looks very different than some of these other voices.
What I'm saying is, what if, what I mean by what where I'm going is, look, we had a supportive, whatever you may think politically, could it have been this, should it be that? October 7th, the United States stood with Israel. What if the government were not led by that, but we're looking at a generation down the line and they're not as favorable? If Israel doesn't have that U.S. support, is what I'm getting at. If it doesn't have that, can it survive? And I think that let's not get into all the geopolitical things, but that idea that, Israel's existence isn't as obvious, isn't as a given as I thought it was on October 6th. I think that is something that many of us have entertained as a thought. And I don't have a clear answer, and I don't want to give a clear answer because there are different answers to that. Let's go as you muse with that, and unless you want to say something.
I feel like I need to muse with that.
Go ahead. On your own.
The thought process of that, I guess it leads me to the question of what Israel are we talking about? Is it the one that at this moment exists, or are we opening up an opportunity with Hatikva, with the hope that Israel could continue, with these other voices coming out, that it could continue to exist in a different sense? And that, like you said, not going into all the politics, but there are ways in which I think we could have that conversation and say it may not look like it does today, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it could be a very awful thing depending on who is working through that moment. So
going to
I've got musing happening here.
Let's go to the awful place for just a brief moment. Hang on, everyone.
Where?
The awful place.
Oh.
Just for a moment. No, what I mean is this follows. Crystal ball. Will our grandchildren celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut? I want to entertain that, and then we'll come back. We're going to end with hope. But I want to ask that question.
Rabbi Kosak's a lot closer to grandchildren than you and I, so.
Well, I hope. We'll find out. Just touching on that, which is a beginning look, right? It's important for us to remember that France was Israel's major arms supplier for quite a long time, until geopolitics shifted and French withdrew and have continued, their relationship, I guess, more with the Arab world, and the U.S. stepped up. So we are in a multipolar world where support can come from many different places. So how does that connect to our grandchildren? So I sometimes like to talk about this study they did in economics as to whether financial pundits predicted market forces better than the average person. And the study showed actually that they were less successful than the average person. They answered, in other words, under 50% correct for their predictions. So I want to, whatever I'm going to say, I want to put it from that thing. I have no expertise on there. With that crystal ball, and part of the challenge is that experts are aware of trend lines and always make the error of thinking trend lines continue as they are. Remember when the new economy of Silicon Valley had happened and it wasn't going to be bound by the old rules? There were thousands of articles in the newspaper. Didn't happen. So on the one hand, right, we are aware that there's a younger generation of American Jews for whom Israel security was never in question, and who've been brought up on what I'm going to get myself in trouble here, bumper sticker tikkun olam, by which I mean beautiful sounding morality that lacks a certain rigor of analysis that the Jewish tradition offers. And I can defend it, so I'm okay getting in trouble a little bit with that. So on the one hand, we do have a trajectory line, trend line, where we do know that there's a gap happening. And on the other hand, what we're already seeing is what I'm, at least in my own head, have been sort of thinking about, the re-shtetlization of American Jewry.
The re-shtetlization.
So, right, I mean, we think of the shtetls as a place where Jews went because you couldn't be out in the larger world. And we're seeing lots of Jews coming back to synagogue and Jewish life in different ways and wanting to be involved and knowing that we share what this Brit Goral, this destiny of choice or not of choice, right? We know that one of the best forces for Jewish solidarity and unity throughout the ages has been anti-Semitism. Terrible to say, but that's a well-studied fact. And so that's the other trend line, right? That there are these forces which we look at and which are disruptive, and we don't like that change, as Rabbi Posen said, and which bring a lot of pain with them that we're all dealing with. But we're also seeing a certain strengthening. Yeah. So I'm not going to read the crystal ball, but I would say that the fact that I can see those two trend lines simultaneously means that if you're only choosing the negative outcome, you're probably Jewish. But that it doesn't have to be, right? But we have just as much, there's just as much of a source to see that this moment is strengthening us.
Okay. Rabbi Posen. 5 words or less. No, just whichever way. You take the answer the way you like. 5 words or less. No. I remember I had a teacher used to say that. That's why I popped in my head. Take your time. Crystal ball.
I don't think that they'll... Yom Ha'atzmaut will always exist because that's what we do as Jews. We take on ritual and then we keep it forever and ever and ever, even when it no longer serves us, right? So second day Yontif. Let's just take in, why do we have a second day of the holidays? We know what the calendar is, but yet we still do it because it's a part of our history. So I think Yom Ha'atzmaut is cemented enough in the Jewish calendar that it will always be observed, whether it's the celebration or a day of mourning. I think that's where we're not right, and I hope that it's the celebration. I think that it in addition to that, will there be an Israel to... Yes, because Am Yisrael is here. There will be an Israel in the sense of that's who we are as a people, and we come together and we do that. And so it may look different. It's hopefully tied to the actual land and the state, and I want to see that happening. I think that it's turning in this moment to being as much about the establishment of the Jewish state as it is about us together as a unified force of Am Yisrael and what that means. Because when we say Am Yisrael Chai, Israel, the nation of Israel lives, we're not only talking about the state, we're talking about the people as well. So the answer is it has to be.
Okay.
Because I can't go to another alternative.
Right. And my answer about the crystal ball, will my grandchildren, God willing, let's see if my children who are 4 and 7 meet a good person and have a good, will they celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut and will Israel exist? My answer is a firm yes, 100% yes, many times over yes. Because of that sort of, there is no choice, and the unity and the hope and atikva, and Israel's very capable. Israel's fighting tooth and nail. Israel has proved over and over again that it can and it will. Ein li eretz acheret. I have no other land. And keep in mind, unlike Jews in the diaspora historically, whose survival and existence was only by grace of the king or ruler of the land, whether they chose to protect them or not, that was it. If you don't have that, you're gone. Unlike that, whatever we might think about certain elements in Congress or in, your whatever city or state you're in, across the States or wherever, in Europe, etc., there are people who are not Jews, who are allies of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. It's very different, even though we are worried at times, very different times. And I think those elements, plus to touch upon geopolitical things for just a moment, I have great, great, great hope about the Gulf states and the possibility of peace in the Arab world with Israel. The Arab street is not on fire right now. The West is. The Arab street is not. Saudi Arabia was close to a deal with Israel, right? It was normalizing. At the end of the previous administration, there was one of the princes of Saudi Arabia went on Arab television and had an interview that was unheard of at the time, where he was extremely critical of the Palestinian leadership and making amazing overtures to Israel. And the talks have continued behind the scenes, and they have. There are interviews recently with the leadership of Saudi Arabia. They said we're still on track. Wow! If they can overcome this, because Saudi Arabia and the Sunni Arab world does not want a Iranian-dominated Middle East. If they can do that, the future for Israel is very promising. And then we go back to so I think that's great. But now we go to our to American Jewry and the West. What is our relationship to Israel? What has October 7th taught us about, maybe not you personally, but it can be, but what has it taught the Jewish community, if anything, about our relationship to Israel? What does Israel mean, or what should it mean to us in the States? Either one. And the right answer is. Well, Rabbi, Posen, you and I, you went to this, you were on this mission to Israel in November?
December. Yeah, December.
And you were on my podcast, and we had an element of this conversation.
We did. Yeah, I mean, I think I didn't think about Israel a whole heck of a lot before October 7th. That doesn't mean that I wasn't aware of what was going on in the world, or that I wasn't saying, Israel is always there, but it's the niggling in the back of the head. It's the, okay, right, that happened or this happened, but it wasn't, my thoughts on Israel as a whole have changed since October 7th. And I wrote about this before I went on the mission that I went on through Federation, that I hadn't been to Israel in 16 and a half years for a variety of reasons, but and my hardship with Israel was the only place, as a Jew, I can't be the Jew that I am because I can't be the rabbi that I am in the state of Israel. And there's a scar, I wrote about it, but there's a scar on my leg that is there from being hit by a rock at the Kotel while holding a Torah. And so the state of Israel pre-October 7th was a place of history, but also of tremendous pain, because my own Judaism was being attacked in that place. And now I've gone, and I was there for 2.5 days, and I have a yearning to go back, which wasn't necessarily there before that trip. Israel is in my every thought, partly because of the atrocities, partly because of being a rabbi. And as an American Jew right now, it is unfortunately how others are identifying me, whether or not I'm there. So as we live right now, Zionism and Judaism are considered one. Right? And that's really tricky for our own identities in this moment. I have to think about it because it's being thrust at us. My kids go to Portland Jewish Academy, and a month ago they were locked down because they were swatted. Somebody called it in to this moment because it was a Jewish school. They were swatted because of the tensions rising about Israel. So now my house every night has my son asking us to lock our doors, double check that we've locked the doors, triple check that we've locked the doors. We had to practice a lockdown drill.
Wow.
He's 7.5. So I can't not have Israel in my head, and I think a lot of American Jews feel that way, that the anti-Semitism has brought it to the forefront in a way that we would never have thought about it. It was always, if you ever needed to go somewhere, you could go to Israel, and I always thought, well, yeah, but I'd never need to go somewhere. That doesn't feel real anymore, to say I'll never need to go. And so Israel is that space of, it's a forced identity, I think, in this moment. It's a place that I connect with, and it's a place that I also feel like I want to scream that just like I don't always agree with our government, I don't have to always agree with the government of Israel, and I'm a different person, and we're not always, like, we're up here having a conversation. We are the clergy of Neveh Shalom, but we are individual, three unique opinions. Yeah. I also want to scream that out, too,
right,
in the world.
We're 3 Jews with 7 opinions. So, I don't know if Rabbi Kosak,
I thought it was
you wanted
8
to
opinions.
8. Right.
So,
we disagree.
what, 8 years ago or so, we started Israel 360 here. And if it were 1975, no one would have batted an eyelash. But when I started Israel 360, it was groundbreaking. It was bold and brave. Why? Because everyone was so scared of the Israel conversation that it was easier to avoid it. And now, Sinwar, Yimach Shemo, said, is so thrilled with what happened because as the Palestinian issue is back on the world table, I want to take that line from him and say Israel is back on the American Jewish table again, right? Everyone, I sent out a letter, still trying to do it, to have like an Israel summit with different communities because there was so much programming now. I didn't want to control, for who's going to listen to me, control what other places and institutions were doing. I wanted to just sort of bring the leadership together to see, can we have a conversation about how we do this so that we don't duplicate things? 8 years ago, 6 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, that was not a reality. And so we're living through the pain of this, but that's a positive statement. Right? We sometimes look at polarized discussions in society and we feel like everything's broken, or is that actually the sign of a healthy democracy? That's a much more complicated story. So the fact that we're talking about Israel everywhere, from the far left JVP to the far right and everyone in between, is actually a sign of strength. Doesn't feel like it because it's messy and painful and because we disagree because of all those different opinions, but there's a way of saying we are awake now, we are paying attention, and that is a source of power.
I think that, I'm a Canadian. My father came from Morocco. My mother from German Holocaust survivors moved from England. So Canada was their first home. Second home. And I carry this, history with me. And till I was 8, I lived in the Congo and Zaire. And I was outside in looking, perspective in the States. And this relationship with Israel, I feel, is more unique to the States, where it's much more in question, historic, like in last several decades and what have you. Whereas I think in much of the rest of the Jewish world, not black and white. There are certainly elements in Canada, elements in England, etc. But overall, there's a Israel is our homeland idea everywhere else, and here much less of that I found. And I think that October 7th, not with everybody, but with many, made them go, oh, I see it's about wiping Israel off the map. If they do that, there is no Jewish homeland. Oh, what does that mean for me? Oh, that is my homeland. I think that happened for a lot of people. And what I try to tell many people, that I care a lot about Israel itself, and I'm interested in the music and all that, but I don't think you need to be, because what I like to compare it to is an Italian American consider themselves ethnically Italian. No one goes up to them and says, what do you think of the president? A little right wing, a little, I don't know. What do you think of their treatment of the migrants, Libyans? What do I know? I'm from New Jersey, or whatever that is. Right? No one. You're Irish American. Yay, St. Patrick's Day. I love the four-leaf clover. I saw Lord of the Dance. Love that, or whatever that is. No one says IRA bombings of the 80s and 70s. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Where were you? What's your opinion on that? Nobody does that. And it doesn't matter how many generations later, there's this pride in their identity. We have this blessing and curse of having been kicked out of our land so long ago that we had many other lands before we ended up here or back in Israel for some of our friends and relatives, etc. And we've lost that ability to go, I'm from Israel, by way of Morocco. I'm from Israel by way of Lithuania or whatever. We go, you ask a kid and it's sort of, they'll go, no, but my family's not from Russia, from Israel. My grandparents came from Russia or whatever that is. And I think it's harder to have that in your kishkas again, to go, oh, I am from Israel. And it doesn't matter what the politics are. You can hate the politics, but no one says an Ireland has no right to exist. And Italy has no right to exist because of its ethical behavior and this and that. Nobody does that. And I think that has stirred a lot in many Jews. Not every Jew, but in many Jews. Before
October 7th, I don't think that I said more. I've said it now. Israel is the land, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are my Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. That's where my story begins as a human being, as a person, as a Jew. That is where my story begins. If I take the Torah as the foundational story of my religion, which is my identity and my peoplehood, that is where it begins. And so it is a part, but it's the land, and it doesn't necessarily, Abraham, the first thing he says in the Torah is a lie. How come no one holds that against him, right?
What is it?
Oh, he tells Sarah to pretend that she's his sister, not his wife. That's the first time Abraham speaks.
Wow.
Right? That goes back to where he was, and it was Egypt, and it was Israel, and it was all this space, right? Like, that's where the story begins, and we haven't had to that hasn't mattered as much as if I tell the story. I've much more pre-October 7th identified with the fact that my mom's mother's family was ousted from Spain in 1492, and we have the family tree that goes back. Now, the Spanish government still won't let me claim anything there because I missed out on reparations from that, and I don't speak Spanish. But I have the family tree that goes back to that moment. I felt much more connected to that than I did to Israel as my origin story. And at post-October 7th, it feels much more present in my Jewish narrative to have that piece.
Yeah, and one thing that Yom Ha'atzmaut, October 7th, put it another way, October 7th has shown many Jews in the States and around the world is to open our eyes and be aware of the world that's around us. So many of us have been utterly shocked. We may have known there was anti-Semitism. We may not have known how much. We may not have known who or what organizations. I've heard so many people say, I feel politically homeless. I don't just mean about political parties, but among certain groups on campus, in society. I thought I was part of them. They were accepted me, but now they don't. All those things. I'm not telling you who to vote for, what's the right answer. We have different types of people and Jewish identity is a rainbow. And no, we can't live in a bubble where we don't keep our eyes open and we're not aware of the reality. We talked about the precariousness of Israel. Israel can't afford to be complacent and not be aware of the threats around her. We can't be complacent and not be aware of what society thinks of Jewish people, where our standing is. And we must battle for a seat at the table and to be seen. And I think that the Jewish community, by and large, in the States, not that we've succeeded and everything's over, but we're not nothing. We're not running away. There are a lot of Jews, a lot of people who have whatever influence they have that they're using to say, we are part of the society. at different levels, whether they're students at Columbia University, whether they're lawyers, whether they're business people who are using their money to, or philanthropists, what have you. So I think that there's room for, now, how does this connect to Yom Ha'atzmaut? Because we're talking about Jews in the place that we have in the States, but I wanted to touch upon that. Instead of talking about the specifics of your message, it was this larger idea that while Israel for Yom Ha'atzmaut cannot, looking at Yom Ha'atzmaut in terms of Israel cannot afford to have its head in an ideological bubble that doesn't look at the world around it, and neither can we. And I think with that awareness and strength of peoplehood and connectivity to Israel, that sense of unity. Now, unity does not mean oneness. It doesn't mean that we don't recognize there are differences politically and socially and otherwise. With that sense of we are connected to each other, and we're connected to that land, that beautiful land of Israel, historically and today. If we don't have that, we don't have anything, but we have that. And with that, we can proceed, and we can look at Yom Ha'atzmaut and go, what? You know what? We're going to celebrate this. We're going to celebrate this as one people with multiple colors and multiple, shades of that rainbow and all that, and we can be together. Now, somebody mentioned the podcast of Chaim Klein Halevi, I think, and Call Me Back. We've had a little bit of a podcast moment here, and that dynamic that Danielle and that they have. I don't know if we have that same sort of rhythm, but I will say that it's been a pleasure sharing, having these conversations with my colleagues, with Rabbi Posen and Rabbi Kosak. Once in a while, we chat about these things in passing, but we don't really have a chance to get into it, delve into some of these issues. So I've appreciated it, and I think I'm going to speak on behalf of you. I think that we all appreciated having this moment to have this conversation with each other, and I really hope we can all look at each other on Yom Ha'atzmaut and say Chag Sameach.
And if you want to do that, Yom Ha'atzmaut has a community celebration at the Middleman Jewish Community Center on Monday the 13th. That's this Monday from 4:30 to 7:30. They are asking for you to pre-register. It's a $5 cover. If that's a problem for anyone, let us know, and we'll take care of the $5 for you, $15 per family. The reason for registration is for security, as you can guess. They are really moving into that space to keep a really secure space. But it's, as somebody who's, people ask all the time, what's getting you through? Coming together in community. The more we've seen it on Shabbat morning minyan even, 7:15. You want to come to morning minyan? It's a great opportunity to come together. But this will there be a celebration? There's a band. It is what's been put together, but I think coming together in community is one of the best ways to also lift our hearts in these moments as well.
Amen. Final thought, Rabbi Kosak?
I'm thinking, for whatever reason, of Sartre, who wrote a book, the French existentialist, wrote a book about anti-Semitism, I believe called The Anti-Semite, but I had to read it in translation back in the day. And he said something, if I'm remembering, it's been at least 5 years since college. He said, anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem, it's a non-Jewish problem. By which he meant that it was a virus that infected the non-Jew, he didn't use the word virus, and was a statement of who they were. We know that we have always been the canary in the coal mine of history. And we know that when anti-Semitism comes up, that there is a global rot. And it's exactly at those moments that the world needs us even more. So why do we celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut? It's because anti-Semitism doesn't belong to us. It's theirs. And it is exactly at this moment that our values and our commitment to pluralism, to a multivocal discussion that is the basis and fundamental of trust in the society, they need us now. And yes, we're focused on our own survival, but when we realize that there is a larger Jewish mission at this moment to remind people of how to be in the world, that's the greatest celebration there can be. So let's dance and eat and rise up and remember that what we're looking at is the pain of the world, and that even now, when so many are turned against us, that we can be the source of healing for them.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all for coming.